Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Mavit Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunavayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Satgurum Brahma Vidvaram. Let's do the Dhyana Shloka. I'll go ahead and share it to my computer. Antaryascha bahirvidutatimiram Jyotirmayam shashvatam Sthanam prapya virajate vinamatam Ajnanamunmulayan Pashyan vishwamapidamullasatiyo Vishvasya pare paraha Tasmai Shri Ramanaya Loka Gurave Shokasya Hantre Namaha. Okay, let's read the verses that we covered so far. So we will read from verse 1 to verse number 3. Okay. Karturajnaya prapyate phalam karma kim param karma tajjadam kritimaho dadau patana karanam phalamashashvatam gati nirodhakam ishwararpitam nechaya kritam chitta shodhakam Mukti sadhakam. Okay, so we have covered these 3 verses. Now, let me just give you a brief overview now what we've done. The first 3 verses are of Karma Yoga. So in the first verse it says, Karturajnaya prapyate phalam. It's by the grace of God or Ishvara, who's the karma phala data, means the giver of the results of actions. That's how we get the results of our actions. If somebody just says, okay, everything is on my effort, I do something and I will get the result. And what's the need for God? Well, the need for God is because action itself is inert. So how is that result going to get to you? So there has to be that total intelligence factor, total all-powerful being, which we call God. So in the first verse, we establish that there is kartuhu. There is that doer, that universal giver of results called God. The second verse, we establish that actions can be very binding. They can take us on and on and on again in the cycle of birth and death because it's never ending. Work for us is never ending. But then in verse number 3, we say, fine, actions in its very nature can be binding, but the attitude can liberate us. And that attitude is nothing but karma yoga. And there we saw 2 very important concepts. One is Ishwararpitam, means its first part of Karma Yoga is all about dedicating our actions towards a higher altar. And the second part of Karma Yoga is Nichaya Kritam,
or also known as prasada buddhi, where there's no insistence on what kind of result we get, but we accept whatever result we get because we know there's so many factors in play which we don't have control over. And this kind of attitude purifies our mind. Chitta Shodhakam. It purifies our mind. Therefore, mukti sadhanam. It leads us to mukti. It leads us to liberation. So the first three verses really talked about karma yoga. And we also saw the logic of why Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, offering our actions towards God, works, and why Prasada Buddhi, offering the results of our actions, works. Logically also, not just from a spiritual perspective. Now we are going to see today Bhakti Yoga. So the next set of verses talks about Bhakti. So before we read the verse, first let's talk about Bhakti Yoga. So we know the word yoga means, it comes from the root yuj. Yuj means to unite. So karma yoga means I'm uniting with the higher through karma or action. Bhakti yoga means I'm uniting with the higher through devotion or through my emotions. So what happens in the beginning of a seeker's life is we have what is called action, and we get into the knack of offering our actions to God. Offering our actions to God means, number one, whatever I'm doing, I do it perfectly well. Whatever is my current duty, I do it perfectly well because I know that this is an offering to the divine. So there is a kind of perfection in the action. It's not just haphazardly done because you're offering it to something higher. Number two, I also expand my vision. So instead of just doing actions for me, for my family, I slowly expand my vision to the community, to the nation, etc. Number three, I also dedicate myself to God, wherein I also become an instrument of God. And I feel indeed that God is working through me. So there is that concept of dedicating all of our actions to God. And that is karma yoga, that sense where all my actions are dedicated to God. But now we're going to talk about dedicating all of our emotions to God. So one is actions to God, one is emotions to God. Now you see what happens with us. It's very much like daily life. You go to work, you come back, and for most people, they leave their work in the workplace. But now, of course, we're working at home. But let's say from the time that you work, some of us are working at home. So the time that you work, and then after that, you let it go, isn't it? So during that time where you're working, and then after that, you let it go. So this karma yoga sometimes feels like only when I'm doing action, there is a remembrance of God. Only when I'm doing something, when I'm engaged in something, then there's a remembrance of God. And some people will say, yes, I did my karma yoga today. So then what happens? It becomes a section of one's life. But that's not really what yoga means. Yoga means your whole life is united to the higher, either through action, through devotion, or through knowledge. So now we will see sometimes after we act, how to stay united to the higher, how to keep that attitude that I'm united to the higher. That's where bhakti comes. How to stay connected to the higher. Bhakti means devotion. What is the difference? Love, in Gurudev's I love you letters, whenever love is directed towards something higher, that is called devotion. So you will see that there's, for parents, there's matra bhakti, devotion towards the mother, pitra bhakti, devotion towards the father, desha bhakti, devotion towards the nation. It's not desha prema, desha bhakti, because it's devoting to something higher, right? Then Bhagavat Bhakti or Bhagavan Bhakti. So it's love directed to something higher is called devotion. What happens in this world, you see, is we forget our connection to God. We completely forget. We have so many relationships, we have so many connections, right? So when did we have this connection with our mother or father? When we were born. When did we have this connection that we are a brother or a sister? When our younger sibling was born, or probably for them when we were born. When do we have this connection that we're a friend? When we meet each other. When is there a connection that there's husband and wife? When you marry each other. So all of the connections in the world, it seems like they have a starting point. They're always starting based upon something, based on an event. Whatever it may be, parent, sibling, wife, husband, when am I an employee? When I start to work in a certain company. So our connections are like that, but we forget that there is a main connection. And that main connection is with God. It's like this. Imagine that we are a wave, which we actually really are. That ego is actually a wave. Imagine if we are a wave, all of our other connections are waves also. Our connection to our parents is a wave. Connection to husband, wife, brother, sister, friend, employee, all of it is waves. It's waves and waves and waves of connection. But what is the connection of the wave with water? It's the deepest connection, isn't it? Because wave is in essence water. It's the deepest connection ever. But somehow we forgot or we forget that the deepest connection of the wave is with water. And this wave is caught up in connecting with so many, many other waves. We have all these networking platforms, all these Facebook waves we have, not waves. Everybody's so many waves. But in the midst of all of these waves, and they're called waves rightly because those connections are up and down. They're never just up, they're never just down, they're up and down. These connections are up and down. But the connection with water is the most stable connection ever. That water will never leave you and me, because it is the very essence of you and me without which we cannot be. And yet, as seekers, we forget that connection. So our whole life is spent with waves, but not with water. Now, why should we even have that connection? One is because that's our origin. That's where we're meant to go back to. Imagine if my whole life I'm just connected to waves and never connected to water. I will forget where I have to go back to. I will forget that this is actually my source, my origin, and my goal. So, number one, that also should be part of my life. Otherwise, I will forget my purpose. The second thing is that when I am first connected to the water and then connected to all of the waves, my relationships become more beautiful and more meaningful. So nobody is saying forget the waves. What Advaita Vedanta is saying is connect to the waves after connecting with the water. Connect to the water, then connect to the waves, and you see how beautiful that relationship can be. What does that mean? Our primary relationship, if you remember, I've told you, is always I'm a seeker first, or I'm a devotee first, and then I'm a friend, and then I'm a son, and then I'm a daughter, and then I'm a wife, and then I'm a husband, and then I'm an employee. I am a seeker or a devotee first, then I am all of these things. Because in that light, one has the ability to face all of the circumstances that happen. If I forget that I am a seeker, I am a devotee first, I will always be confused about my identity, my emotions, my feelings. It will be very hard for me to stay strong in any relationship, because we know that life is all about impermanence. So it will be really, really tough. So, for example, there's this one very beautiful story about this rabbi and his wife. Now, this rabbi, he used to give sermons in the synagogue, and he had two sons, and his wife was at home. And one day, all of a sudden, out of the blue, the two sons passed away. Now, nobody what happens, how it happened, nobody knows why it happened, how it happened, but it happened. And the two sons passed away. Now, this wife, this mother, she was in tears because she just, like, how is it that both your sons pass away? And that too, for a parent, when your child passes away, that's the most painful thing, when you outlive your child. And so, what she did now, she said, my husband will come home. How will he take this? So, she covered up the bodies, she sat, and she thought. And she said, now, how will I convey this to my husband? How will I convey this very tragic sorrow to him? So he came home after his sermon, and he was looking for his sons. He says, where are my sons? Where are my sons? Because they usually come to greet me every time I come home. And she says, they're there. But first you have your food. Sit down, have your food. And then he has his food. And then he says, okay, where are my sons? I want to see them. She says, I need to ask you a question. He says, you need to ask me something. Why is it I usually ask you, but you're asking me? She says, yeah, I need to ask you something. Let's say I borrow 2 pearls from the neighbor. I borrow 2 pearls from the neighbor, and then they ask me to return it to them. What should I do? He said, of course, why are you asking me? You know the answer, you should give it back. She said, but what if I don't want to give it back? What if I find those pearls so precious and I don't want to give it back? He says, but you have to give it back because it's not yours. And she looks at him and she says, our 2 pearls were not ours, were taken away. And we had no choice but to give them back. And she, removes the blanket and she shows her sons who have passed away to the husband. With this kind of knowledge, with this kind of thinking, she was able to control her tears, because one always has to be the stronger one. Both cannot fall at the same time. Otherwise, it's very hard. And he was very shaken up. Now, please see, the strength in her being a wife came from her identity as I am a seeker first. I understand that these children are not mine, and I understand that when God takes, God takes. Now that connection from her side gave her that strength to deal with that. So when we have this connection with Bhagavan, it gives us the strength to deal with all of these things. We become better in our other relationships. So that is the second point about why to connect to God. Now, the question comes as to how to connect to God. So, to connect to people, our regular relationships, our parents, our friends, our brothers and sisters, little bit easier because we can see them. We can experience, having a great time with them. We can laugh and joke with them. But when it comes to God, it's very subtle. It's very, very subtle that how do you connect with God? If somebody tells you, how do you connect to God? How do you do that? Connect to Wi-Fi is very easy, right? The passcode, this and that. But how do you connect to God? So our scriptures have made this beautiful way how to connect to God through what we call bhakti. So now that is the introduction to this verse 4. Verse 4 tells us how to connect to God. So we've seen what is bhakti, we've seen why it's important to connect to God. Now we will see how to do that. So verse 4, I will read. Okay. Kayavangmana karyamuttamam pujanam japaschintanam kramat. We'll say together. Kayavangmana karyamuttamam pujanam japaschintanam kramat. Okay, so make sure you have a book, or if you have the words, then it'll be easy for you to follow. Otherwise, it becomes difficult and you won't enjoy so much. Now, what it says here, there are 3 ways to connect to God using the 3 instruments that we have. Kaya means body. Vang or vak means speech. Manaha means mind. Karyam means this is to be done. This is to be done through body, speech, and mind. What is to be done? Pujanam, japa, chintanam. So puja is to be done for the body, japa is to be done for speech, and chintanam is to be done for the mind. Kramat means in this order. It goes in this order. And uttamam means it goes from gross to subtle. The puja, the japa, the chintanam, it goes from gross to subtle. Uttama means superior, but superior here means subtlety. Now, what is this puja, japa, chintanam? So, we will see a little bit today. You think of a relationship of a boy and a girl. Let's say this is how we can understand a boy and a girl. The first time, the boy would like to give gifts to the girl, and also the girl would like to also make things for the boy. So the boy will bring flowers or send chocolates or send a card. Now I don't know what you all do, I have no idea, but before, back in the day, this is what everybody did. And then the girls would write letters or they would send something. So this kind of giving gifts, giving flowers, baking a cake, making something, this is how they would express their emotion towards the other being. This kind of thing, when it's directed to God, it is called puja. Because puja also, you give flowers, you make naivedyam. Like you bake a cake for your loved one, you make naivedyam for Bhagavan. Like you buy flowers for your loved one, you buy flowers for Bhagavan. You buy perfume, you put chandanam. The same thing. Whatever you do for your loved one, you do for Bhagavan. You just change the altar. And when you change the altar, it becomes puja. Now, then slowly, the boy and the girl are getting closer to each other. What happens? There's talking, lots of talking on the phone or WhatsApp, texting, or emails. So much like this, a lot of exchange of words because they want to get to know each other more, because I want to get to know you and this and that. And they'll ask each other questions and all of that. That talking and texting and WhatsApping, when you do that to Bhagavan, that is called japa. I am texting Bhagavan, this is Om Namah Shivaya. But only with Bhagavan, it's the same thing. With your loved one, it'll be different. How are you today? How was your day? This, that, like that, you will say. With Bhagavan, it's very easy. You just say Om Namah Shivaya or Om Shri Saraswati Namaha. That's it, right? So you take that speech and you move it to another altar. That's called japa. Then what happens to the boy and the girl? After some time, they say, we want to have a heart to heart talk. Heart to heart talk, where now they're not texting and talking, they want to spend quality time with each other. And that quality time, they don't want any disturbance. Also DND, they don't want a phone ringing, computer, this and that. Quality time where they can sit together and they can just have a heart to heart talk about life or about everything, because this is how they become close to each other. And they look into each other's eyes also, and it has to be in person, in front of them, and you meet like that kind of conversation that you have becomes very deep. And that kind of conversation that you have, you forget everybody and everything in the world. You go into samadhi, isn't it? Now you take that same thing and you put it to Bhagavan. That is called chintanam or dhyana, where you have a heart to heart conversation with God. And it is absolute quality time where you don't want to be disturbed at all, and you forget everybody, you forget everything, and you just, your mind, your eyes are just closed and focused on God and God alone. And that depth is called dhyana. So you see, the way we build a relationship with somebody, that's the same way we build a relationship with God. Now somebody will say, but now how? I have so many relationships. As I said, Bhagavan is the primary relationship. Then based on that, all other relationships can be built.